Chevy's electric Blazer is the roomiest and most family-friendly two-row EV in America. It's actually one of the roomiest anythings with two rows. This front seat is all the way back, and you can still put a rear-facing child seat like this behind it. And that puts the front passenger seat so far back my feet aren't anywhere near the floorboards, and I'm looking at the shoulder belt. But this specific Blazer EV is the high horsepower SS model, and that's why, to me at least, it has the resurrected soul of Buick's GNX. Yep, this is kind of like the Uber Grand National in that it's a different kind of American muscle car. Now let's set the stage for this insane brainwave of mine. It was 1987, I was in elementary school, and a Buick GNX cost $29,290. That was more than double the average new car transaction in 1987, which was $12,013. Those really were the days. This is $64,675. Actually, quite a bit more affordable in relative terms than that GNX. This is only 35% more expensive than the average new car in 2025. But you get 615 horsepower, all-wheel drive, 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds. So at least for me, this is kind of a Grand National for the 21st century. And trust me, I'm going to defend that in just a moment. But before we get to that, let's touch on the rest of the Blazer EV. And full disclosure, we have a Blazer EV as one of our long-term vehicles currently. We leased it for 2 years because it was an insanely cheap lease deal. But it's the polar opposite of this. It's the absolute base trim with zero options other than a blue paint job. Visually though, they look pretty similar. It's kind of that Grand National thing in a way because it looked like other Buick Regals of the era. This gets a subtly retweaked front end, but the bulk of this is the same. Same sort of light pipe, same sort of headlight look there as well. Not everything up front is shiny black. The lower part of the bumper is shiny gray, and that is going to hide scratches a little bit better than the black section here. The bummer with the shiny black is not only is it going to show actual scratches really well, it's also going to show those fine scratches that you might get when you wash the vehicle better than the red paint job on top. The shape of the Blazer EV bears no resemblance to a classic Blazer, but I'm oddly okay with that because I've always had kind of a soft spot for wagons, and that's really what this looks like to me, maybe a 21st century Dodge Magnum, if you will. At 192.6 inches long, this is long for the two-row EV SUV segment. It's about the same size as a Polestar 3, decently longer than a Ford Mustang Mach-E, or importantly, a Tesla Model Y. And the biggest difference is right back here. If it's not obvious, this door is longer than the competition's doors, as is the front door. So we get a lot more interior room and a moderately sized cargo area behind. The big difference between this and a Polestar 3, which is really the closest option in size in this category, is that that was not built on a dedicated EV platform, and this was. Now, Polestar and Volvo, they argue about the Polestar 3 and the EX90, but they're very closely related to the XC90, and that's why this has a whopping 5 inches more legroom inside than we find in that Polestar. And the difference is really, really obvious when you get in the back. The changes to the rear are similarly subtle. We get tweaked taillights that are clear when they're off rather than being red tinted, and then we get a different treatment to the lower bumper, which again catches a bit more dust and scratches a bit more easily than the base model. The back seat is clearly where we need to go next because just check out how much room there is back here. The numbers don't tell the picture, and I'll talk about that in just a second. With the front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I have a whopping 9.5 inches of legroom left there. And we have a completely flat floor. Now headroom, that is a little lower than I might like. Of course, we have the panoramic moonroof in this particular model. If you want a bit more headroom in the front row, you can skip the moonroof if you get that base trim. But check out what's happening over here. As I said before, you can actually fit a child seat rear-facing behind a front seat all the way back in its tracks. This is all the way back. I'm going to go ahead and remove the base station for my daughter's child seat here so you can see what this looks like with an adult over here, because there is just simply gobs and gobs of room. I still have some legroom left here. Again, front seat all the way back. Now, it's important to remember that not every car company measures legroom the same way. There are standards around how legroom is measured, but the key difference is that some car companies put the front seat in the 80th percentile position, or sorry, 80% back position in its track, and then they measure rear legroom in that position. Then they put the front seat all the way back and they measure front legroom in that position. That doesn't give you a good idea of how much room is going on inside. Chevy, on the other hand, does not do that. They put the seat at the 80th percentile position, or 80% position, and they measure both in that position. That's why the number is so big, but something like a Tesla Model Y looks close. No, in reality, this has considerably more room than a Tesla Model Y, and the rear bench is really, really wide. With the Cluck infant seat back in, you can see that we do have the required space between the front seat and that seat, even when this seat is all the way rearward. We have plenty of room for that load leg there. Importantly, it also doesn't interfere with either of the belt buckles, so that outboard buckle isn't even being occupied. We have a huge armrest that you can still fold down with some of those larger child seats in place there. Even something like a Kiko convertible child seat, forward-facing, rear-facing, you can put that in here with its cup holders and not have them interfere with these cup holders. This means that if you're a parent and you want to sit in the middle seat to help take care of your child, that's going to be a lot easier and more comfortable here. We also have a shoulder belt that comes out of the seat back itself, not out of the ceiling, and that's really going to help center that child seat in the middle. Really, the only thing missing here would be a third complete set of latch anchors, because there would actually be room back here. They could have put them in this middle section, and they did not. Now, speaking of those latch anchors, they are ISOFIX anchors, so theoretically they do have that slightly higher load capacity, but they do have these doors, which I really hate, because these are going to break off, you're going to lose them. That, I think, could be better. They could just use a flap, or they could just stick a slot in there where you could do that. And adults may notice that if you are sitting in the exact wrong position, you can actually feel this little door cover area right there on your rear end. With this seat belted into that center position, you can see just how much room is going on here. You could easily put 3 child seats in here, and not just 3 small child seats. You can actually put some of those larger seats in here as well. For my size and shape, I find the front seats to be pretty comfortable. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a reasonable range of motion, but we don't have front seats that are as adjustable as some. 2-way adjustable lumbar support here for the driver and the front passenger, but the passenger's power seat bottom cushion does not adjust for tilt. You should also know that these seats are definitely on the wide side, and there's not a lot of aggressive bolstering. So I can slide, I don't know, maybe at least 2 inches side to side before my side actually starts hitting the bolstering on the front seats. If you're a broader framed person, this might be better for you, but if you're really narrow, keep in mind that you'll be sliding around a bit. But of course, that kind of goes with the muscle car vibe. And remember, I did say 21st century muscle car, not American sports car. This has that big, comfy, fast vibe. GM decided not to give many of their new EVs front trunks for some pretty logical reasons. Obviously, the first one is the hood doesn't need to be as long. This hood is significantly shorter than the hood in a Model Y or a Mach-E. There's no secret where that storage area comes from. It comes from giving the vehicle a longer hood. But I still think they could have given this some sort of pizza box size storage area for the charge cable, things like that, so you aren't having to dig through the trunk in order to get them out if you need them. Now, this does kind of make sense, because in the front-wheel drive version of the Blazer, the charge door is up here, and that means that they can put the AC charger under here. Of course, the heat pump is under here, the 12-volt battery, the fuse box, everything that makes the car go is basically in the front, rather than distributing the components in places where it wouldn't necessarily make sense. And that's also, of course, why we don't find a charge door relocated to the back like some people might like, because in the front-wheel drive model, it makes more sense to have everything right here up front. And maybe we should start there. The front-wheel drive version of this for 2026 is going to give you 220 horsepower, 243 pound-feet of torque, and 312 miles. There's then an all-wheel drive model, 300 horsepower, 355 pound-feet of torque, with a range of 283 miles. That's approximately the corollary of the Blazer EV that we have as a long-term lease. That uses an 85 kilowatt-hour battery. Both of them do. The next model up is this Blazer EV SS. And if you notice what's missing, it's the rear-wheel drive model. It doesn't appear that there's going to be a rear-wheel drive only model for 2026 with the big battery. That means the longest range version is going to be that front-wheel drive one with the small battery. This is next at 303 miles, but in trade, you get 615 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. The reason it's able to give you that range with obviously the lower efficiency everything that's going on is because it has a bigger battery, 102 kilowatt hours. Both batteries will charge at the same rate when connected to an AC power supply, just over 11 kilowatts, but at a DC fast charge station, the bigger battery is going to charge faster, 190 kilowatts peak versus 150 for the smaller battery. But there's another tickle you should know. Both batteries are relatively low voltage compared to other modern EVs. And that does mean that if you get the small battery pack and you roll into most 150 kilowatt stations in the US, you're not actually going to hit 150 kilowatts. You're actually going to be about 50% or 30% less than that peak charge rate. You're probably going to want to seek out those 350 kilowatt stations or, of course, a compatible Tesla supercharger. Speaking of supercharging, for 2026, General Motors is not switching the charge port on the Blazer, so it is still going to have a CCS connector. I don't really think that's too much of a problem because honestly, adapters are going to be a way of life for everybody for the foreseeable future. It wouldn't be a performance trim if it didn't have other changes in addition to the extra power, but it wouldn't be an American muscle car if those changes were too extreme. So we do find 30% stiffer springs, 60% stiffer anti-roll bars, and a slightly lowered suspension. We also have monotube dampers and Brembo brakes up front, but we have 275 with tires, and it weighs 5,730 pounds. That's nearly 400 pounds heavier than a Dodge Durango with a 6.4-liter V8. Some of you may be surprised to hear that for such a big vehicle, it doesn't have a terribly large cargo area. 25.8 cubic feet is convenient, but it's not as roomy as some of the options that you might be considering. And that's likely just because of where they put the back seat. They pushed it as far back as possible to give you that enormous passenger area, and it does come at the expense of the cargo area. And this is the only cargo area we have. There's enough room here to put 22-inch roller bags like this one in that position, but you could still fit more luggage total in even some EVs that are a bit smaller than this. But I also think that GM could have used the space more efficiently because under the floor we find a really deep storage well, but it's not terribly broad, so you couldn't put much luggage in that area, maybe some soft gym bags or things like that. These plastic dividers are removable ultimately, but you'd have to kind of unbolt them and move them around. You would then get more actual usable space. Over here we have a place where you can put your knickknacks, your charge cable, things like that. We also have the tow hook recovery hook there. But this is not as usable of a cargo area as I might like. As we look around this interior, keep in mind this is basically the top-end trim. We have our OnStar buttons here, buttons for the big panoramic moonroof that you'll see in a bit, slide to the side sun visors, those undock and slide out right like that. We have grab handles for all 4 seating positions, and we have that big panoramic moonroof with the shade that goes just about to the rear passengers' heads. The front pane opens, and it is a nice wide opening as well. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, 2-way adjustable head restraints with the SS logo embossed on them. But as I said before, we don't have terribly aggressive bolstering on these front seats. In fact, these seats look basically like the rest of GM's SUV lineup. I was a bit surprised by that for something with the SS label on it, that we didn't get adjustable or simply more aggressive bolsters on the seat back and seat bottom cushion. But if you're a larger person, these are going to be more comfortable. Here's what the NACS or J3400 to CCS adapter looks like, just in case you were wondering there. It's basically the Tesla adapter. Moving over here to the front doors, we find a combination of hard and soft touch plastics, so plenty of hard plastics down there around the bottom of the door and that storage area. I do think that storage area could have been a bit bigger. We have the red upholstery there, stitched of course, stitched upper section there, sort of an imitation carbon fiber design there with a textured hard plastic piece right in the middle of everything. Moving over to the dashboard, we have a very similar design to the rest of the Blazer EV lineup, of course, just with the red accents here. So the red imitation leather there, red stitched upper section of the dashboard as well. Turbine-style air vents. Down here, we find a bin-style glove compartment. I was not able to fit a larger tablet computer inside. And just in case you're wondering why I said imitation leather, that's because most dashboards like this are actually imitation leather, even if they're color matched to the upholstery in the vehicle. So the seats are leather, but the bits on the dashboard are not because they're more durable. Now, here in the middle of everything, we find an absolutely enormous touchscreen system. This is one big reason to get the Blazer EV over a lot of the competition. Just the size of this screen, and I do kind of like the fact that it's a horizontal screen, not a vertical screen like we find in so many EVs, but no Apple CarPlay, no Android Auto is supported on this screen. And I do think that's a really huge bummer because the Bluetooth interface, you know, it works, but it is not as intuitive, not as easy to use as CarPlay or Android Auto. And simply for a company that loves to talk about company choice, which General Motors does seem to do all the time, it seems really weird to limit customer choice by not allowing the customer to choose one of the things that seems like everybody really wants. Now, on the infotainment system, this layout is also a little bit convoluted because some of the controls are not in the most logical place. We have some controls there, we have some controls on the home screen, the drive modes are right there. The drive mode also offers a Z mode here for competitive mode where you can adjust things like steering, brake feel, whether you want competitive mode itself to be on or off. This is the wide open watts mode that gives you access to all 615 horsepower. Power output from the battery is going to be about 450 kilowatts. With that mode on, it's maybe about 390 with it off, so you are going to get a performance reduction. Over here we have a button to toggle on off the one pedal driving. You can also adjust it there on screen. This is how you turn off the vehicle with that little button there, and then the headlights, they're right there in that control. But GM did not remove all the physical buttons, so we still have knobs for the dual zone automatic climate control. Some of the controls are up there on the screen, but a large number of them are physical controls. More of those turbine style air vents right there in the middle. I do kind of like these. They're very functional. You rotate them to close them, and it's easy to direct the air around the interior where you want it to go. Below that, we have two USB inputs, a really deep storage well right there, and you can close it off with that roller style cover. Big cup holder there, Qi wireless charging mat that is able to charge phones through some of those thicker cases. And then we have a pretty deep storage well right here in the middle. I do think there's some lost opportunity with the storage area here in the middle here. I think they could have put some rearrangeable bins or something like that, but I can't complain given the price tag of the base models. Over here on this side, we find a configurable LCD instrument cluster with a bunch of different views, including Google Map views right there, more of a modern view, and you can adjust what's happening in the quadrants kind of in an odd move, or an odd way, I guess you'd say. We go over here to some of these options, and then you can say add to driver display, and that is how you choose what's over there in that display rather than adjusting it with the controls on the steering wheel. Now, speaking of the steering wheel, it is a pretty thick rimmed wheel. Up here we have the display for the Super Cruise system, which is standard on the Blazer SS. We then have controls for some of the audio functions over here, heated steering wheel, voice command, etc. But then on the back of the steering wheel, we find volume up, down, and track forward, backward buttons like we find in other GM models. On this side, we find one little baby regen paddle. If we pull that paddle, it's going to command about 100 kilowatts back into the battery. You will get more if you put your foot on the brake pedal because this does have blended braking. On this side, we find an additional button module. This is where we find the electric parking brake, the lane centering assist, auto hold, and then over here we have our seat memory switches. Head-up displays always look smaller on camera than they do in person, but up here we do have a pretty big display. It does occupy a decent portion of the dashboard, and the dashboard is a little peculiarly shaped, I would say, if you don't get the head-up display option. Now, speaking of that dashboard, it is really, really long. If I move out here, I've noticed it's pretty difficult to clean because this is about as far as I can reach. Climbing over the steering wheel with the steering wheel practically on my chest, I'm kind of up there, but it is difficult to actually wipe that windshield because that dashboard is just so enormous. All right, it's time to get the Blazer EV SS out on the road, and you will definitely notice a lot of power. 615 horsepower gets this 0 to 60 in 3.35 seconds, just a hair faster than GM's quote. I'm gonna go ahead and close this shade here, since we do have that powered shade, and it is something I appreciate because it does completely block off the light. It's not one of those partial shades. Now, really quick 0 to 60, but if you're comparing this to a Model Y Performance or an Ioniq 5N, it is not in that same league. An Ioniq 5N will do 0 to 60 significantly quicker than this, down in the 2.7 to 2.8 second range. It's about 1,000 pounds lighter than the Blazer EV. But, you know, the Blazer EV is bigger and it's roomier. The Ioniq 5 is pretty roomy, but this is that next level in roominess. And you know, I think I'm willing to give up some of the performance dynamics that you find in those vehicles for this. It's just a very different vibe in here. But importantly, if you are that person that's trying to cross-shop 600 plus horsepower EVs with one another, just know this is not like the other things because of that curb weight, because of the tire size and the tire choice. 275 with tires are not skinny, but they're not as wide as I think I would have put on something with a SS label on the back. And that's part of why this takes a lot longer to stop from 60 miles an hour. The Ioniq 5N can accomplish that task in 100 feet or less. This, well, you know, it's going to take a while. About 119 feet for this to stop. A decent score and an improvement over the regular Blazer, but not that next level of braking performance where maybe some people, again, might have wanted this to be. And all of that rains down on the handling. The weight, the tire size, etc. That's why this is not going to handle like a Model Y Performance, or again, Ioniq 5N, etc., etc., etc. When it comes to the handling score, I'm going to give this a B. But you know what? The handling score, the braking score, and the quick 0 to 60 time are why this feels like an American muscle wagon to me. It feels big, it feels heavy, it's comfy. You can tell that the springs are a bit firmer, but they're not crazy. You can tell that the tires are lower profile, but again, not as crazy as they could be. Obviously, not as high profile as that Buick Grand National, but a lot of the changes are very much what Buick did in the 1980s to turn the Regal into the Grand National and then that into that next level, the GNX. Out on a rougher road like the one that we're on here, you will definitely notice the suspension changes and of course the lower profile tires. We have those decently firmer springs, firmer anti-roll bars as well, so we do get less tip and dive, less body roll here than we find in the rest of the Blazer lineup. But in a way, it's a little bit at odds, I guess you'd say, with the weight and the rest of the feel of the Blazer, which, again, handles better than the regular Blazer, the SS model that I'm talking about here, but not enough better, I would think, to justify maybe the loss in ride comfort. The regular Blazer is really, really comfortable. And don't get me wrong, this is still pretty comfortable. Out on these rougher sections where we have potholes here like that, it does a really good job soaking them up. Definitely better than a lot of high-performance EVs out there without adjustable suspensions. But I think an adjustable suspension would have made more sense for the Blazer EV SS because it's available in their lineup. There are, of course, the Acura ZDX, which is related to this, has an adaptive suspension system. The Cadillac Lyriq has some adaptable suspension options, etc. GM has the technology to do it. They decided not to put it, however, on this model. When it comes to the ride quality score, I'm going to have to give this a B when it comes to the ride quality. Again, not overly firm, but firmer than I thought it would be. And sort of in keeping with that American muscle car vibe, we again have the wide seats, where you are going to kind of slide around. You're going to have to kind of move yourself around as you're on your favorite winding mountain road in this more than you would in a car that really kept you firmly in place. But the interior is comfortable and it's pretty quiet, 61 decibels in here. The ride score, as I said, definitely pretty decent, below the regular Blazer, but still pretty good when we're talking about a performance vehicle that can go 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds. Efficiency, obviously, that is a little bit of a problem. We've been averaging 3.1 miles per kilowatt hour, 3.1 miles per kilowatt hour. That is a little bit better than the EPA numbers would indicate, so a little bit over 300 miles of range if you did completely use the battery. Now, there are multiple ways to think of this. Clearly, the efficiency is not as high as some of the alternatives, but thanks to the bigger battery pack, we have range that actually is longer than most of the performance alternatives. The Ioniq 5N really doesn't go terribly far on a battery because of the wide, sticky tires and some of the aero changes, etc., and the fact that its battery is notably smaller than this. But, of course, that smaller, lighter battery pack is why it drives and handles the way that it does. This really is going to be the better option for road trips as long as you don't need to do a lot of DC fast charging, or if it's more of a leisurely road trip where you don't mind stopping for 45 minutes to DC fast charge, because that's about how long it's going to take to get a usable charge out of this battery. On the 100% down to near zero, you're going to be able to get maybe 270, 280 miles of highway range treating this gently, and then about 20% less than that on those subsequent fill-up cycles where you're only going up to 80%. I know that I'm going to get a ton of hate comments for daring to compare this to a Buick Grand National. Half of them are probably going to come from my brother. But on the other hand, if Ford can call a 5-door electric SUV a Mustang, you know, I think I can dare make that comparison. Since 2026 pricing is out and the federal tax credit is dead, let's dive into the pricing, bearing in mind that it looks like GM is basically going to compensate for that tax credit loss by discounting the Blazer. Some amount, we just don't know exactly how much for the 2026 model year. But base price, $46,095. Again, that gets you the front-wheel drive LT. If you want the RS trim, that's $51,895. There's no additional power. It's just RS styling and a few other features, basically. The all-wheel drive model, which is sort of the modern corollary to the long-term Blazer EV that we're going to have for about another 10 months or so, that's $49,095. Although you do get a bit more power than we have in ours. Of course, if you want the all-wheel drive SS trim, that is a significant bump, $62,095, so $16,000 more over that base model, about $13,000 more than the base all-wheel drive trim. So what do you get for that extra cash? You get more range by a hair, you get faster DC charging, rain sense wipers, wider tires, the power hatch at the back, ventilated seats, power seats. You get the Bose 8-speaker audio system, which I don't think is an incredible upgrade over the base audio system. As far as base audio systems go, the Blazer SS, or the Blazer EV rather, already has a decent system. But the one in the SS with that Bose upgrade, it's not a lot of extra speakers, and it's only 2 extra speakers actually. And the performance of it just is not different enough to really, say much about it. At any rate, you also get dual zone climate control. The big thing is Super Cruise, which is about a $2,000 to $3,000 option depending on the GM product you're talking about, heated steering wheel, and a leatherette seating. You also, of course, get the Blazer SS Power, 600-something horsepower. You get the upgraded brakes and upgraded suspension, etc. Is it enough of a tweak? Well, we are in a world where GM has applied the SS badge to a wide variety of things. Sometimes it's been more of a style and trim package. Sometimes it's been a standalone model even. And sometimes it was even applied to a Chevy Malibu Max. And not necessarily to be unkind, but in some ways the Blazer EV SS is more like that Malibu Max SS in sort of a way than a Camaro SS, depending on exactly how you want to look at it, because this is still a big, family-friendly, cargo practical kind of thing with a hatch. It's not quite an SUV like the Malibu Max wasn't quite an SUV, and it's not a sports car either. It's this sort of quick but not necessarily nimble SUV thing. And there are some corollaries in the industry, but there really isn't anything quite like the Blazer EV SS. The closest you could get, I suppose, is a Mach-E GT. Mustang Mach-E GT, because of course Ford is trying to call that a Mustang. At any rate, that is less expensive, $56,490 for 2025. We don't know what the 2026 pricing will be like on that Mach-E GT. However, we do know it's going to be more expensive, and you're going to get about 40 miles less range. Now, the Mach-E GT is not as big inside as the Blazer. It doesn't feel as big on the road either. So if you prefer that bigger vehicle feel, that bigger cabin, that slightly softer ride, you want the Blazer. If you want something that's a bit more nimble, not a lot nimble, but a bit more nimble, then you want the Mach-E GT. But comparably equipped, these two are actually quite similar in price because Blue Cruise is optional on the Mach-E GT. There's also another performance option package you can check for about $1,000. By the time you've done that, they're basically about the same price. And it's really just going to depend on which dealer is giving you the best deal at the moment and what kind of factory incentives there are from Ford and from Chevy. The other thing that is sort of like the Blazer EV SS, very strangely, is the new Jeep Wagoneer S. I like the Wagoneer S in a vacuum. I think by itself, if you don't look at the price tag, it's a pretty solid electric Grand Cherokee. Because it kind of sort of is in some weird ways, although apparently it's actually more closely related to the next generation Jeep Cherokee without the Grand. At any rate, it is $67,195, and that is the biggest problem with the Wagoneer. The price tag is bonker stupid. Now, lots of discounts are happening. Theoretically, it also got the tax credit. Bottom line, it looks like Jeep is giving somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 off of every Wagoneer S to help that metal move. But you will get about the same amount of power or a little bit less power depending on the model you get. The launch edition was 600 horsepower. The limited trim is about 500 horsepower, but the range is decent. It's really comfortable. It has a big cargo area in the back. The seating position is a bit more upright rather than reclined like in the Blazer, but both of these have a lot of room and they definitely have a big feel. Also, neither of these vehicles was trying to chase the Porsche Taycan when it comes to handling. The Blazer EV SS does feel a little bit more put together than the Wagoneer S, but the Wagoneer S, it's better handling than some vehicles out there, but it's pretty heavy and it has a lot of front wheel spin. In fact, so much front wheel spin, I found it kind of amusing. At any rate, big, soft, and American describes all three of these options, less so the Mach-E GT, but definitely the Wagoneer S. Then we also have vehicles that this is certainly not like, but you might be cross-shopping against this. Something like an Ioniq 5N, significantly more refined, significantly more dialed in, significantly more performance-focused, with a lot less range. In a lot of driving situations, you could expect to get nearly 100 miles less range in the Hyundai because of the wide, grippy tires and just the bonkers nature of that vehicle. It was designed to be a track Ioniq 5, which is kind of silly, but that's what it was designed to do. And that's also sort of what we see in the EV6 GT to a little bit less of a degree. It's like the Ioniq 5N, if it's a 10, then EV6 is kind of like a 9.5. They have a lot of the same sort of systems there, but everything has been cranked up to the next notch in the Ioniq 5. And EV6 GT is quite a bit smaller inside. Both of those vehicles charge very quickly, but the EV6 GT just won't get you as far on a battery charge as the Blazer EV. Thank the wider tires for that again. It is also not a Model Y. Model Y is, of course, the elephant in the room. It has the Tesla charging network. That's a big advantage. But I do think that the Blazer EV is unique enough and different enough that people will prefer these vehicles rather than cross-shopping them directly. I don't imagine too many people driving a Model Y, driving a Blazer EV, and then really hemming and hawing about the differences. You're going to really gravitate towards one or the other. There's not a lot of middle ground between them. The Model Y is lighter. It is really quick 0 to 60. It has that big screen in the middle. It's very tech-forward in its presentation. Not that there's necessarily much more actual tech behind the screen than in the Blazer EV, but it presents it in just a more modern way, whereas the Blazer EV is trying to be this blend of modern and traditional Chevy features without the start button, etc., and of course no Apple CarPlay. Bottom line, the Blazer EV SS is a modern American muscle wagon, I guess you'd say. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section. Pros for this model are the enormous interior, and I am not kidding. It has a huge, and very, very practical back seat. But the cons are relative efficiency, the handling ability, and the fact that it doesn't charge as quickly as some of the competition. Now, in reality, how many people are DC fast charging all the time? Not that many. If you plan on using it as a road trip vehicle, shop somewhere else. But for folks looking for just a swift, very practical daily driver with lots of room for kids and all your gear in the back, it's kind of hard to go wrong with the Blazer EV. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section as well. See all of you later.